I think this is very important, not just addressing to COVID-19 itself, but also through our presentation, listening to leading experts expressing how we might be able to facilitate international collaboration on maritime security and safety, especially in this difficult time. And I think this afternoon, fortunately, the organizer has prepared almost 2 hours for presentation and also discussion. So this is the beginning of this session. I want to once again appreciate the organizer for inviting me moderate such a distinguished group. And of course, this is one specific moment we can really hear not just a conflict, differences, and differentiation among countries and peoples, but we are really looking into how we might be able to work together and seeking for a better way maritime security, to strengthen such a maritime security. So without much further ado, and I think follow through the presentation as the organizer has already put it 10 to 12 minutes for individual speakers. Since this online conference, the time is really precious, and I will encourage all of you look into the CV individual speakers, so we don't have to repeat a long list of such a wonderful career. So the first one, let me invite at the scene Professor Zhang Renping, professor from the College of International Collaboration, Dalian Maritime University, also leading expert in the field, an old friend of mine. Professor Zhang, please take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me, right? Can you hear me or not? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, no problem.
Go ahead. Yeah, sure, we can.
Go ahead. Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Wu Shizun, and thank you for the organizers as well. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I would like to present a bit of a scenario on the international cooperation of this under this the COVID-19 pandemic. I have a brief question for some of them. What are the key factors that could affect the maritime security and the safety? And one of the key factors that I think is the human factor. The human factor, so I'm talking about the seafarers. Now let's have, yes, can we? Now, the international cooperation to address challenges faced by seafarers under this COVID-19 pandemic, I'm covering the 4 areas, which include the general impact, the seafarers crisis and crew change at the sea, the key workers status, as well as the way forward. So what is the general scenario of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the shipping and especially on the seafarers? Shipping and the seafarers are vital to global supply chain and the world economy. Around 1.9 million seafarers work to facilitate the way we live. Seafarers have great professionalism and dedication, helping to deliver food, medical supply, fuel, and other essential goods. But COVID-19 pandemic has put seafarers around the world in a precarious situation and seriously disrupted crew changes. A large number of seafarers need to be changed over each month to prevent fatigue, to comply with international maritime regulations for maritime safety, crew health, and welfare. Well, the governments are continuing to impose border closures, lockdowns, and preventative measures, which include suspending crew changes and prohibiting crew from disembarking at port terminals. Hundreds of thousands of seafarers remain stranded in the sea due to these restrictions, and there's no solution globally. While about 250,000 seafarers are currently stranded, on board ships beyond expiry of their original contracts and unable to be repatriated. The problem comes, the physical and the mental health status of seafarers could have an impact on maritime safety. The international organizations, maritime industry have expressed concern of a humanitarian crisis. The IMO, ILO, and UNCTAD at the center have urged member states to designate seafarers as key workers, while last December, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution on international cooperation to address challenges faced by seafarers. While this resolution urges member states to designate seafarers as key workers and encourage governments and other stakeholders to implement industry-recommended framework of protocols for ensuring safe ship crew changes and travel. So the COVID-19 factors may include the crew change crisis. This could have a very long-term consequences, and the cruise ships, the return to the service brings reactivation risks, and also the maritime safety. The COVID-19 creates risks to the shipping safety. Now, let us focus on the seafarers crisis. The International Labour Organization Maritime Labour Convention 2006 sets out rights and responsibilities for seafarers working under living conditions, including repatriation, where the ILO also published a revised guidance on how to best to address the complexities of the current crisis. ILO urges all ratifying states, flag states, port states, labor supplying states to take measures to facilitate repatriation of seafarers. As we mentioned, around the world, there are nearly 1.9 million seafarers, while officers are less than 1 million, while ratings are a bit more than 1 million. So which countries are among the top 5? Let's have a brief look. The Philippines, the Russian Federation, Indonesia, China, and India. So 4 Asian countries are among the top 5 seafarer supplying countries. So what is the scenario for the seafarers or crew overdue change? By November 2021 statistics, about 7.1% seafarers are beyond the expiry of their contracts. And what is the scenario for the seafarer vaccinations? Also by November 2021 statistics, about 41% seafarers have got their vaccination. Now, let's have a look at the crew change and the key worker status. A number of international conventions and instruments contain provisions aiming to reduce the formalities, documents required to facilitate and simplify crew changes. While this list illustrates a very relative international legal regimes, including ILO Maritime Labour Convention, ILO Convention number 108, IMO Convention, we call it the FAL Convention on Facilitation, at the center. This year, the International Maritime Organization celebrated the World Maritime Day. The theme is the seafarers at the core of shipping's future. So the whole headquarters is lighted up in blue color that night. Also, we mentioned that the UN resolution adopted last December urges UN member states to designate seafarers as key workers. While the IMO last month, the Maritime Safety Committee adopted a draft assembly resolution urging its member states to designate seafarers as key workers as well. What is the way forward? The seafarers are still facing serious problems as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. This requires urgent action through international cooperation. The vaccination first. The collaborative efforts by industry, governments, and international organizations should ensure that seafarers are designated as key workers and are vaccinated as a priority, while for the crew changes, governments and industry should continue to work together and in collaborative with the relevant international organizations to facilitate crew changes. For the outbreaks and emergencies at sea, governments, international organizations, and all stakeholders should regularly update specific guidance on measures to prevent and deal with COVID-19 and other outbreaks at sea, and ensure that mechanisms are in place to reduce, respond to medical emergencies at sea. The international legal framework, states and the relevant stakeholders should keep under review the relevant legal framework in line with ILO and IMO provisions, and to ensure that international obligations are respected and implemented. So with that, I would say thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Professor Zhang. Originally, I thought you have such a long presentation slides. I thought you might not be able to complete in due course, but obviously you have done a very good job. From your presentation, some of the key words are connected together. This is exactly what we are searching for lately. Something like shipping, seafarers, and supply chain, plus national security. So that is why we are sitting together from different angles, looking into how we might be able to tackle such a new challenge. But I think over the last few months, not just in China, but also other countries like the United States, the shipping obviously is so crowded and becoming such a great challenge to each government there. So let's now invite Mr. Helmut Hesed from London, former special representative of the IMO, Secretary General for Maritime Security and Anti-Piracy Programs. This is a great honor to have you. Please take the floor.
Well, good afternoon to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting me to this meeting. I'm going to share my screen with you and hopefully see everything. It's a pleasure, as I said, to be with you virtually, only unfortunately to talk about IMO's role in maintaining maritime safety and security with a view, of course, of the current status of and influence of COVID-19. IMO's mission is to aware safe, secure, and efficient shipping on clean oceans. Professor Ramping already referred to this year's World Maritime Day theme, Seafarers at the Core of Shipping's Future, which is, of course, particularly relevant in this situation, and will reflect a little bit more on that, although Professor Ramping has already done so, and I will not repeat. Next year's World Maritime Day theme is new technologies for greener shipping, which again is particularly appropriate in respect to the climate change and decarbonization of shipping being discussed and considered for the near future, as well as new technology arrivals like the maritime autonomous surface ships or MAS. IMO has a high percentage of ratification of its main conventions. Here you can see nearly 99% of the world tonnage is usually represented by those ratifying countries. Now, ratification is of course one thing, implementation is another, and that in many cases leaves much to be desired. Responsibility of implementation lies, of course, initially with flag state for their own flag ships, but as a second line of defense or safety net, as we call it, we have port state control. and port state control being arranged in regional activities, regional memorandum of understanding on a global case. In the South China Sea, for instance, that would be the Asia and the Pacific, or shortly called Tokyo MOU, dealing with these. But these two activities are not sufficient to virtually control the implementation of treaties by the International Maritime Organization. Hence, the organization initially developed a voluntary, graded mandatory, an IMO member state audit scheme, whereupon the member states are being audited every 7 years. Objectives of the IMSAs, of course, being to determine the extent of member state implementation and enforcement of applicable IMO instruments. Benefit for the member states is, of course, that it fosters capacity building and provision of technical assistance to those countries who require it, mainly countries, small island states, etc. Provide audited member states, of course, with the feedback to improve their implementation capacity, at the same time providing all member states with feedback in generic terms on lessons to be learned, and provide the organization systematically with feedback on lessons to be learned for future consideration at IMO in terms of amending or preparing new treaties. Sorry, jumping. As far as maritime security is concerned, past 9/11, we have developed at the time the SOLAS Chapter 11.2 on measures to enhance maritime security, and the ISPS code is now applicable to 167 member states, mandatory. As far as terrorism is concerned, further developed or had already developed the SUA Convention, which was then subsequently amended, main purpose being to take appropriate action against persons committing unlawful acts against ships, obliging contracting governments to extradite or indeed prosecute alleged offenders. Piracy, of course, already defined in the UNCLOS Convention, is being dealt by IMO on, again, a regional basis, because obviously the mode of operation, the business model is very different in the regions. We developed at the time the Djibouti Code of Conduct for the Somali Basin piracy. Accordingly, we did another one for West and Central Africa. Also, we saw the development of a cooperative mechanism for the Malacca and Singapore Straits. Unfortunately, the littoral states at the time did not want to consider maritime security issues under this mechanism. Hence, IMO supported the development of RECAP, the Regional Cooperation Agreement, in the Asian Pacific area. And we developed some kind of prototype protection on shipping lanes, for instance, for other high-risk areas like the southwestern Indian Ocean. We saw specifically with the Somali piracy situation more and more involvement of the UN and member states, of course. This was triggered by the IMO asking, of course, the United Nations to get involved. The United Nations Security Council adopted a number of resolutions, basically allowing hot pursuit of naval forces into the waters of Somalia with the consent of the Somali government, obviously. They established a contact group on piracy off the coast of Somalia, in which, of course, we participated, and IMO having developed and approved the international recommended transit corridor in the Gulf of Aden, relied heavily on the navies operating in that part, specifically like, for instance, NAVFOR and other national navies, which were admirably well coordinated by the shared awareness and deconfliction mechanism, or SHADE, in Bahrain, which still operates today. And it's a fantastic example how well navies of countries of totally different geographical and political positions can work together and coordinate their activities when it comes to a global threat as piracy was at the time, or still is. Also, the use of privately contracted armed security personnel in the high-risk area relied heavily on the consent of member states, because they need to, as flag states, approve the carriage of weapons on board ships. It's not moving. The recent challenges in this respect is, of course, the blatant attacks on merchant ships in the Gulf of Oman, for instance. Here again, the United Nations Security Council started debating maritime security in earnest. This new high-level alertness of the UN is, of course, very much appreciated and welcome, but it gives also an indication that the center of gravity in the maritime security debate may indeed gradually be shifting towards York. Impact on the maritime security debate at IMO is undoubtedly to be looked at and considered. And also this has an impact on maritime industry in general terms and its associations, which have always been historically and still are very active in the discussions and considerations at IMO. How they will be contributing to a future UN debate needs to be looked at. Now, as far as the recent challenges with regards to COVID-19 is concerned, I will be very brief on this one, because, as I said before, Professor Ramping has stolen my thunder, my powder here to some extent. He has very much given you most of the issues related to that. We talk about, of course, extended periods of work on board, seafarers stranded ashore without repatriation. One example, for instance, I know personally of is the Kiribati seafarers. I have been working in Kiribati for a while as an advisor. Kiribati seafarers being stranded in Hamburg for over a year, and they can't be repatriated because Kiribati has closed its borders, unfortunately also to its own countrymen. This has a huge impact, of course, on seafarers, which is physically and mentally considerable. IMO's action, of course, to mitigate this was the initial call of Secretary General to call on member states to consider and take appropriate actions. The World Maritime Theme, we have talked about it already, and the World Maritime Day on 30 September had a symposium on crew change crisis, which was the consideration from various aspects, from seafarers, from member states, and from shipping organizations, shipping lines. It was very interesting to see where the challenges are and where the crises are. Huge challenge for shipping industry and the well-being of seafarers, of course. IMO has indeed adopted a resolution, having agreed on the establishment of a joint ILO-IMO working group, and the resolution calls on member states to prioritize seafarers in national vaccination programs, noting thereby, of course, the WHO SAGE roadmap in that respect, exempting seafarers from proof of COVID-19 vaccination as a condition for entry into countries, provide infrastructure and facilities for COVID-19 vaccinations of seafarers, and more importantly, of course, inform seafarers also of the benefits of vaccination so as to encourage them to be vaccinated. The Maritime Safety Committee also approved a draft assembly resolution, which will hopefully be adopted by the assembly this month, designating seafarers as key workers, as Professor Ramping said, providing frameworks of protocols for ensuring safe ship crew changes and travel, prioritize seafarers as per resolution 1 above, exempting seafarers as per resolution 2 above, and provide seafarers, more importantly, with immediate access to medical care in general terms wherever required. More needs to be done, no question about it, although, as again, as Ramping said, 41% of the world's seafarers are being vaccinated by now, which is an encouraging increase from 31, 22% in September, August, respectively. In North America, 50,000 foreign seafarers have been vaccinated by the authorities there, plus, of course, those employees which are employed cruise ship. Deployment and repatriation is still an issue. Stricter isolation rules, for instance, in China, do not make this deployment repatriation feasible. Close of borders, high long isolation requirements. Also the issue of vaccines, 2-dose vaccines, where and when to get the second dose if you got, luckily, the first one somewhere else in another part of the world. And some vaccines are not being recognized by other states. So you may be vaccinated, but it's not recognized by another state. So IMO, ILO, and WHO have their hands full to produce a uniform global framework. A globally accepted vaccination certificate, for instance, would be one thing, and for instance, making vaccination mandatory might be another possibility. And I thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any question, maybe later on in the question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hesse, for bringing in such a timely security challenge to the maritime security today. And I think one of the key points you addressed, perhaps later in the floor discussion, we can highlight whether such a high-level alertness may indicate a gradual shift, as you indicated. Those issues have been brought into UN Security Council for discussion, and not addressing to IMO itself. So maybe there is some change here. Whether this trend will be leading to a long-term shift completely, maybe this is a serious question later. You can elaborate a little bit more from here. Let's move on to the third speaker. Let's now invite Dr. J. Tariela from Manila, Commander, Philippine Coast Guard, who is already ready with a uniform. Commander Tariela, please go ahead with your presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. My apologies, I do not have PowerPoint slides. Instead, I'll just be boring you about my speech for this presentation. Before I start, I would like to emphasize that my presentation is a product of my research. Its content does not represent the stand of my government or any institution in the Philippines, especially the Philippine Coast Guard. Secondly, I would like to thank Dr. Wu Shikun, Chairman of the Board of the China Southeast Asia Research Center on the South China Sea, for inviting me to join this symposium on global maritime cooperation and ocean governance. The presentations made by the previous speakers before me prove that international cooperation is what we need to strengthen our efforts in advancing our mutual interests to make sure that our seas are safe and secure. The literal movers of our global economy, the seafarers, are looking up to our governments, big and small, to develop the best strategy to mitigate the pandemic's impact on the shipping industry. The IMO also demands cooperation from its members to tackle the looming adversities in maritime safety and security exacerbated by climate change and the pandemic. In relation to their presentations, I would argue that the regional cooperation for a rules-based maritime order in the pandemic remains robust. Such an argument will be discussed in the three parts. First, I will focus on the maritime cooperation between the extra-regional powers or middle powers, particularly Japan, Australia, and the European Union, in building the capability of the Coast Guard organizations in the Southeast Asian region. I will focus on the deliveries and outputs of these middle powers concerning their commitment to support the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Secondly, my discussion will also zero in on the strong cooperation among the ASEAN states. I will highlight that despite the pandemic, the differences among the states are set aside to push for maritime cooperation and even possible joint oil exploration. Thirdly, I will contend that the pandemic has dramatically affected the dealing of the ASEAN for the great power competitors. For the United States, it successfully maintains its positive cooperation and trust building with countries in the region. On the other hand, I would contend that China's pre-pandemic playbook in establishing bilateral cooperation through dialogue and training with these countries in the region had been ominously impacted. Lastly, I will share my conclusion. For more than a year, the pandemic has significantly affected countries all around the globe. However, the cooperation between the middle powers and the Southeast Asian littoral states support the latter's capacity for maritime security and maritime safety remains unchanged. While the pandemic slightly delayed the deliveries of assets or even the construction of critical infrastructure, Japan, Australia, and the European Union fulfilled their commitment of support. Also, in the case of sponsored training and bilateral and multilateral dialogues, some of which did not push through, but most of these activities had been realized through virtual meetings and platforms. The pandemic never hampered Japan to continuing its multilateral dialogues like the head of Asian Coast Guard Agencies meeting capacity building program last year, or the annual alumni event of the Maritime Safety and Security Policy Program last September, and the recently concluded second pilot program of Coast Guard Global Human Resource Development, which was also concluded only last month. Similarly, the Australian government also did not diminish its engagement with Coast Guard organizations in the region, since such activity is also planned under its civil maritime security initiatives. We can see this between the Philippines and the Australian ambassador's recent visit to the Philippine Coast Guard in Manila last month, wherein he mentioned the establishment of the U.S. Australian Philippine Civil Maritime Security Initiative program. With regards to the acquisition of Coast Guard vessels, both Japan and the French government had become the leading supplier of white ships for the Philippines. Vietnam has also inked a $350 million loan agreement with Japan to construct the Vietnam Coast Guard's 6 patrol vessels. The French government, on the other hand, has also made a new proposal for the Philippines to acquire 40 units of 24-meter fast patrol boats for the Philippine Coast Guard, along with the 2 additional 84-meter offshore patrol vessels and the 2 coastal patrol boats from OSEA. While physical lectures are not possible for maritime training, these countries have been innovative in utilizing online platform to continuously support the training of this Coast Guard personnel in the region, particularly in maritime law enforcement, maritime search and rescue, and even pollution prevention. It is also worth mentioning the statement of French President Emmanuel Macron, wherein he declared his plans to launch a South Pacific Coast Guard network to counter predatory behavior, which was basically aimed against illegal fishing in the Pacific. Last week, Japan Coast Guard patrol ship Tsugaru was directed to patrol the sea, and it is expected to hold maritime exercises with Southeast Asian counterparts in the next coming weeks. As to the influence of great power competitors, the United States has successfully cooperated with these littoral states in the region through online and on-site training, virtual meetings, or even at sea maritime exercises. Since the onset of the pandemic, the United States government continuously supported the Southeast Asia Cooperation and Training, which was participated by 22 nations, proving that multilateral engagement would still be viable during the pandemic. The virtual setting did not just emphasize the need for improving maritime domain awareness as a shared interest, but more importantly, it has emboldened the significance of regional cooperation in the middle of pandemic. Washington was also victorious in maintaining its engagement with the Coast Guards from the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Just for example, the US government has concluded its tactical combat casualty care training with the Philippine Coast Guard officers and crew. In Indonesia, it has allocated $3.5 million funds to construct a maritime training center in the strategic area of Batam in the Riau Islands. For the case of the Vietnam, Washington also transferred recently the ownership of the second 115-meter patrol vessel from the US Coast Guard cutter to the Vietnam Coast Guard through the US Foreign Military Financing Program. In contrast, China's pre-pandemic playbook in establishing bilateral cooperation through dialogue and training with these countries in the region had been ominously impacted. We can see this with the result of the not so significant impact of the third China Coast Guard and Philippine Coast Guard high-level meeting, online meeting last year. It never actually created so much bearing, unlike the previous years when the Philippine Coast Guard and China Coast Guard had this meeting in Beijing and also in Manila. Secondly, the Whitsun Reef incident that captured so much international attention put the spotlight on China's gray zone strategy in the South China Sea. This was also exacerbated with the China Coast Guard and maritime militias activities in harassing Malaysia's state-owned Petronas company, oil exploration in Luconia Shoals, and currently ongoing Indonesian drilling operations in the oil and gas field at the Tuna Block area of the Natuna Sea. During this pandemic, the Chinese government vessels and Coast Guard ships' persistent presence in the disputed waters caused the Southeast Asian claimant states to distrust Beijing. There were even claims that while the world is scrambling to address the concerns in the pandemic, the assertive Chinese activities in the South China Sea escalated from April 20 after Beijing has completed its COVID-19 containment operations. Such utilization of China's white ships paints a negative image of what the China Coast Guard is. Instead of employing it as an agency that could steer cooperation in the region, it is perceived to be a devious organization used to harass, track, or even attack with a single objective of changing the status quo and undermining the existing rules-based maritime order. Among the Southeast Asian countries, recent developments unfolded, which suggested that despite their differences, agreement to cooperate on oil exploration and maritime security may also still be feasible and could be realized. It is an exciting development that despite the intramural differences among ASEAN members, particularly Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines and Brunei, these countries contest China's sweeping 9-line claim over the resource-rich waterway in the South China Sea. Nevertheless, in the recent years, their competing interests made it difficult to cooperate, particularly in matters concerning maritime resource management and security. However, Malaysia and Brunei Darussalam have disproven such. Both countries have already formalized a unitization agreement to develop 2 oil fields in their maritime boundary. At the same time, the new maritime accord between the Malaysian Maritime Enforcement Agency and Vietnam Coast Guard could also be considered a turning point among these littoral states in the region to cooperate and support one another and not fight among themselves. Other countries can also adopt this particular bilateral cooperation in the region. In conclusion, this paper posits that cooperation on maritime safety and maritime security during this pandemic, particularly within the region with the United States, Japan, and Australia, remained robust. However, the objective of such cooperation is anchored on all parties' intent of ensuring a rules-based maritime order by capably supporting the Southeast Asian countries to counter state and non-state actors that are not in adherence to international law. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commander, for your so profound presentation on the current situation in Southeast Asia. Of course, you have already presented two fronts of effort from the United States and China, working extremely hard in the region, regardless of the pandemic situation here. But I think you have highlighted the key point, a rule-based maritime order, even in the time of COVID-19. So I think we will definitely return back to the issue later when the floor is open. So let's move on to the next speaker, my old friend, Captain Martin Sebastian from Kuala Lumpur. And I think you are quite familiar with the local audience, and I don't need to go over introduction. And I'm sure Martin would have lots of update and also the new briefing about what exactly happening now. So Martin, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, sir. And hello to my fellow speakers. Very honored to be with you all again on this August panel. Thank you very much. Can I have my PowerPoint, please? That I sent a PDF copy to NICCS. Can I have that uploaded so I can use that?
Okay,
Good.
Martin, why don't you just go ahead? And I think the staff are now preparing, sharing the PPT soon. So you can just go ahead.
Right. First of all, I'll share Malaysia's experience. As many of you know that we are gifted with three waterways, which is Straits of Malacca, South China Sea, and also the Sulawesi Sea. But during a pandemic, these three waterways, which are a gift to Malaysia, it quickly became a problem. Though we managed to close the air traffic, the air movement, the land side where we had roadblocks and all that to stop people's movement since it was a contact disease, our borders were very porous and we needed to open the ports for essential supplies and medical goods. So the sea entry point was our vulnerable part when it comes to the pandemic. So what we quickly experienced was migration issues in the Straits of Malacca, where on the north we had the Rohingyas and we had mixed migration. Yes, that looks like mine. Let me just, okay. So yes, next slide, please. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so this is the seascape of Malaysia's waterways. As I explained, Malacca Strait, South China Sea, and Sulu Sea, Sulawesi Sea. Next slide, please. And we are the only divided landmass in ASEAN, as you can see the picture just now. And here I go to the Straits of Malacca. As you can see, the Rohingya influx was from the north, and from the south, we had the Indonesian influx because of the porosity and proximity of our land. So whilst we conducted naval operations and law enforcement operations here, we were unable to address issues like organized crime, people who were actually involved not only on the refugees movement, but also trafficking and smuggling migrants into the Malaysian borders. So through that difficulty, we can have the next slide, please. We managed to establish international cooperation because of this mixed migration. As I said just now, we had refugees, smuggled, trafficked migrants and asylum seekers. And as you can see in the picture here, the law enforcement officers or the boarding party themselves have to be protected. So there's logistics issues here, and there's also some constraints in trying to board vessels with so many people. Next slide, please. And so what we did, we connected with the Australian Border Force, and this is one example of international cooperation to ensure that maritime security in the Straits of Malacca gets better attention. From this Operation Redback, the idea is to combat maritime crime, identify all the logistics supply, criminal logistics supply chains, the demand and the supply, and the organized crime stakeholders that are involved. And so far, we've been quite successful. And as you can see here, the commanders themselves have taken the responsibility to address this issue on media. Here it is, the Joint Agency Task Force Operation Sovereign, Borders Commander, and also the Director General of the Malaysia Coast Guard. Next, please. Now, when we go to South China Sea, we have a different problem. South China Sea, as you see here, not only has our oil and gas, but also a vast maritime estate for food security. But this is another issue here. And because of the vastness of the South China Sea, where in the middle, if you see the map, we have the Natuna Anambas island chain, which belongs to Indonesia. And then off the peninsula and off the Borneo's maritime real estate, which is where Malaysia has its fisheries, it becomes a challenge for us to address. Next slide, please. And you can see here what type of threats that we are looking at. We are looking at illegal fishing. We are looking at threats to offshore oil and gas platforms, and of course, transshipment ships. And you can see in this picture how the transshipment ships conduct fish laundering. Fish laundering is where clean ships, clean fishes that are registered, which are actually well reported, are mixed with dirty fish, inverted commas, which is bought from the trawlers of the respective nations, and then it is sold to the premium markets by transshipment ships. But what transshipment ships also do is supply forced labor, and they conduct fish narcotics. They bring in narcotics through this vessel, and they apply their trade there. So next slide. So international cooperation in this has to go with the experts like Global Fishing Watch and United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, where tracking systems are collaborated with the law enforcement agencies, like detecting dark fleet using satellite technology, checking on their radio waves, and focusing on forced labor like smuggling of migrants, illicit drugs, and all this. So through this cooperation, we managed to address fundamental issues in the South China Sea with regards to knowing what we don't know. Prior to this, we don't know what we don't know. But with this, we try to identify transshipment ships, illegal fishing vessels, like what was informed by Commander Chariala just now, a new cooperation is underway, a cooperation with Vietnam Coast Guard, where the Malaysian Coast Guard and the Vietnamese Coast Guard will be working together to address this illegal fishing in South China Sea. Next slide, please. Now, the Sulu Celebes Sea, many of us know what are the issues in this, I call it Wild East, in the tri-border area, where all the three capitals of Indonesia, Malaysia, and Philippines are far away from this region. Next slide, please. So here we have completely different challenge, threats like militancy, terrorist activity, kidnap for ransom, destructive fishing, and smuggling routes, foreign fighter routes, and all that. So as you can see, the complexity of the threats that we have in our waters, we will require international cooperation, because no single agency and no single country can handle these kind of multiple threats within their waters. Next slide, please. So with this, we started the international cooperation, trilateral cooperative arrangement with Indonesia and Malaysia, committed by the respective ministers. So we have their patrol, we have designated routes, we have exchange of information, and we set up a lot of intelligence gathering to address these issues in the tri-border area. So as we speak about international cooperation, we are not limited to sovereign states alone. We are also working together with organizations like WCO, World Customs Organization, Interpol. We work together with the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, with Global Fishing Watch, with NOAA in the United States, to help us to identify movements in this very critical area in the Sulu Celebes Sea, and to protect seafarers, to protect the coastal and island communities from being kidnapped for ransom. So with that, I conclude international cooperation on maritime security in Malaysia, Malaysian waters in focus during the pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin, for this presenting us such an international cooperation example. I think especially in this difficult time, such international cooperation represents something very unique and useful example to all of us. So we now have 4 speakers presenting their views already, and we still have 3 commentators. Actually, these 3 commentators are all from different continents. The first commentators are from Australia, Professor Warwick Goulet, who is a law professor, Australian National Centre for Ocean Resources and Security, University of Wollongong. Professor Goulet, please take the floor.
Thank you, Professor Liu Fuguo. First, I'd like to thank Professor Wu Shichen for the invitation to be involved in this very important conference. And there's a lot of interesting sessions across these 2 days. And I was delighted with this particular session because we are in the era of COVID-19. We've all been working hard in the maritime space in areas of marine environmental protection, maritime security, and all that work has to continue despite COVID-19. And there are obviously a lot of challenges that are faced around the world in the maritime sector. And so this panel helps bring together some of those challenges under the banner of cooperation and what is needed to improve the situation. So I've got a few comments about how this has been put together, this panel, which I thought was very good. So looking at the presentations, not necessarily in the order that they were given, I would say overall, the theme that links them together is about cooperation and is about people, in particular the people at sea who are impacted by COVID-19. So perhaps the last area I'll talk about is the impact on seafarers, which was, of course, the key part of our first speaker, Professor Zhang Renping, and also really the the most pointed area from our second speaker, Mr. Hartmut Hess. And of course, he said that the first speaker stole his thunder about seafarers. So let's come back to that a little bit later on as an absolute standout challenge. So our other two speakers were looking in particular at regional or local challenges, and at, let's say, for our speaker from the Philippines, Dr. J. Teriela, especially focusing on capacity building. And in the area of maritime safety and security, capacity building is a top priority, and it has been for years. And he was telling us about some of the ongoing work in capacity building that is taking place in the region, despite COVID. And a key aspect there is a lot of the training programs are continuing, but in the online environment, just like, unfortunately, most of us are not in Sanya, but nonetheless, we're able to participate in this meeting. And some of the cooperation programs for capacity building that was mentioned by Dr. J. Teriela, he mentioned also including Australia. So where I work at the University of Wollongong, Australian National Centre for Ocean Resources and Security, capacity building has been a key part of our centre's work. And a lot of that work has continued, including with the Philippines and places like Indonesia, in the online environment. So obviously it's not the same as being with people in person. However, there are still some benefits. And one of those tends to be a greater number of people can be participants in these events, and costs are kept down. So of course, we are looking forward to the time when international borders are completely open, and Australia, that's a very recent matter. But there are some pluses to some degree in how the world has adapted online to the challenges of COVID. So let's go back and think about some of the issues that came forward, presented starkly by our first speaker, Professor Zhang Renping. So that's the human cost of COVID-19 on the 1.9 million seafarers around the world. Now, right at the start of the pandemic, when countries were facing the problem of the virus coming across their borders, a lot of the attention was focused on shipping, in particular cruise ships. So we saw relatively rapidly various countries close their airports to most commercial travel, and for most of us that's the way we get around by flight. But as Professor Zhang mentioned, we've had to continue with the shipping sector, and we've been heavily reliant on it to enable all supply chains to continue. So the initial focus, I'd say, was on for countries was on airports and stopping the large influx of people that way. But nonetheless, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of ships were still at sea. And the shipping sector that was really the greatest challenge for the virus was the cruise ship sector. And a lot of the focus was on the passengers, not so much the crew, which is where Professor Zhang has been taking the discussion now. So the cruise ship passengers, of course, cruise ships, you've got the highest number of of people on board those vessels rather than container ships and so on. And by and large, you've got passengers who are more elderly and therefore more susceptible to the medical complications of COVID. And we saw a lot of tragic situations of cruise ships being stuck in ports and a lot of difficulty dealing with other passengers. But largely that situation has abated because the cruise industry largely has shut down, although Professor Zhang is now mentioning it could be opening up. But we have the current challenge of hundreds of thousands of seafarers in various areas of the world. We're still incredibly reliant on them. There's a need to change over crew, as Professor Zhang mentioned. There's a need for seafarers to be vaccinated and to make their way back to the countries where they want to go. So that is a most significant challenge. And our second speaker, Mr. Hess, gave us an excellent, at the start, overview of all the approach that the IMO has taken to deal with maritime security and safety, in particular in the last 2 decades since 9/11, and then moving on to the more particular focus of dealing with the seafarers. So there's a lot of synergy between our first and second speakers in dealing with seafarers. And obviously we need cooperation here. That's just absolutely critical. If we've got countries, as has been mentioned by our speakers, having different requirements for entry across their borders for foreigners and even nationals about vaccinations, have the seafarers been vaccinated? In which case, which vaccinations have they used? And we talk about double vaccinations, but of course, some countries are now moving towards booster shots, the third level of injection. So this is an incredibly difficult area to deal with. Each country has their own sovereignty, wants to have their own approach to protect their nationals, but it's a critical area for international cooperation, and we are relying on the IMO's work to deal with this. So it's one of their many challenges that they're facing on top of all the other work that they're doing. So it is critical to be supporting the IMO here. And Mr. Hess has mentioned about how just about all international shipping comes under the various IMO conventions. And with new regulations coming forward, hopefully with the seafarers, that will provide a bit more guidance for countries to accept seafarers despite them coming from more difficult situations. And I think our heart goes out to so many seafarers, including some that Mr. Hess knows well, the Kiribati seafarers in Germany who have got a long journey back to Kiribati and currently can't do that. So the seafarers is a critical challenge under the COVID-19 situation. Moving on to our third speaker, Dr. Jay Tariella, again talking about capacity building. So it is pleasing to hear from him how cooperation has continued in many ways, almost it seems at full strength from various countries that are middle powers, as you said, in the region, and other countries that have got great interest in the South China Sea. And he singled out, in particular, the US and Australia. But he's also left us with a key message that was mentioned by our chair. His argument that seems to be a sound argument that in dealing with the challenges that we have in the South China Sea, that supporting a rules-based international order is critical, and some matters that he mentioned that can undermine that is the activities of states. So this also I think links us to our fourth speaker, Captain Martins Sebastian from Malaysia, with outlining some of the other critical challenges that we're still facing in the region in maritime security. Countries in this region are reliant on the fisheries resources. Enforcing fisheries law has to continue despite COVID-19. But here's outlined, we've got additional challenges being faced because of COVID-19, in particular of criminal activity. So I think this is a key aspect countries need to focus on, that all the work that has been going on in maritime security and safety has to continue despite the additional challenges of COVID-19. And this is difficult, especially when you get to situations where you could have arrests of people at sea, where there's of course going to be concern about a vessel that's going to be arrested. Are the crew on this vessel that's breaking the law, are they vaccinated? And if so, can we verify that? So there could be real at-sea challenges faced by enforcement officers by the fact that the virus can be out there on other vessels as well. It was also good to see our fourth speaker mention the cooperation between Australia and Malaysia, and that the surveillance and enforcement program, Operation Redback. I thought that was interesting. It was Operation Redback. Redback, we saw the picture in the logo, is an Australian spider, a poisonous spider that we have around here. So hopefully that's sending a very serious signal to the criminals that are being targeted in that activity. So I thank the organisers for setting up this panel, highlighting the challenges that we are facing at sea due to COVID-19. And I think in particular, the ongoing challenge of returning seafarers to their home ports and facilitating the exchange of crew on all those commercial vessels. And that is critical because we are all reliant on shipping to continue unabated. Thank you. I'll hand back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Goulet, for such a wide open comment. I think this would be a challenge for now for our three commentators. Cover quite a different ground, but I listened carefully your comments on Professor Zhang's presentation and also on Mr. Hayes' presentation on IMF and operation. Obviously, it highlighted one of the specific area, humanitarian security or human security aspect of maritime security today. So these are something very useful. I thank you for bringing up such a key point for maybe later more discussion onto these specific area. So next, let's now invite Dr. Anne Fenech, head of the Marine Litigation Department. Fenech and Fenech advocates from Malta. It's probably, I can say, European perspective on the issue. Please, Dr. Fenech.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for, first of all, to Professor Wu. It is so wonderful to see you, Professor. It's a shame we can't meet in person. And of course, to Mr. Zhang and to you, the moderator, for doing an absolutely marvelous job. It is wonderful to be invited to share some views with you. I must admit, I have found the presentations given by all the speakers to be absolutely fascinating, particularly for somebody like myself, who is involved in the private side of the maritime industry, completely the private side of the maritime industry, and who comes, of course, from a totally different part of the world. So this for me has been a real eye-opener. I have listened very attentively, and to be perfectly frank, I think Professor Gullet from Australia has really hit on all the very, very important points which have been made by the speakers. And I sort of got a sixth sense that this might happen. So with the kind permission of the organizers, I asked whether I could perhaps give the distinguished delegates this morning and guests and ladies and gentlemen attending this important symposium, perhaps a slightly different perspective of the subject matter. And I have prepared for you just a few slides to share with you some thoughts. Now I'm going to try and share my screen here and hope that it will work. I would be grateful if the organizers would indicate to me whether or not they can see my slides. Can you see my presentation? Super, thank you for the heads up, Professor Gullet. So I'm going to be sharing some thoughts with you on the effects of the COVID pandemic and safety measures on the maritime sector, very much from a private law perspective. And of course, immediately, I'd like to take you to our part of the world. And we see there Malta, bang in the middle of the Mediterranean, equidistant from the Straits of Gibraltar and Suez, from the European continent and North Africa, and Malta is at the edge of one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. So, of course, when we all saw what was happening around November, December of 2019, going into January 2020, being a marine practitioner and knowing how, or well, not knowing, having some vague idea of what a pandemic might have on the maritime sector, of course, nobody then could possibly tell us ever the extent of the situation. In February 2020, I had penned this article on how the novel coronavirus may be affecting the maritime industry. And I had said then that the effect of this public health emergency on the maritime industry is significant and is having multiple repercussions, ranging from passengers on board luxurious cruise liners being quarantined on board ships held at anchorages, prohibited from getting into port or prohibited from disembarking, to ship owners of merchant vessels refusing to go to ports as ordered by their charterers on the grounds that the ports are unsafe. That was right at the beginning. Of course, little did we know the extent of the effect of the pandemic would have on the real shipping activity being conducted around the globe. And of course, the effect on the maritime industry of the safety measures that have been taken during 2020 were, as we all know, very, very substantial. With international port and airport closures, we've heard so many speakers speak about the impact of the crew and crew changes, or the failure to enable crew changes, leading to numerous disputes under marine contracts of employment, with the most, I believe, thing which we can all agree on, the most significant effect was being on the well-being of the crew who are, to a certain extent, still unable to go home. Of course, we saw disputes arising out of charter parties related to safe port and the frustration of contracts. And of course, all of this meant a severe disruption in the trade and earning potential, leading to a sharp decline in the carriage of goods, charterers not being able to pay their charter hire, owners not earning enough from their ships, leading them to be unable to pay their mortgages. We saw the closure of shipyards, leading to ship repair contracts being delayed. We saw what effect it had on yachting and the use of mariners. And of course, the effect on irregular immigration. Now, again, I am looking at this very much from the perspective of the effect on real day-to-day shipping. Now, in Malta, as in most parts of the world, we were inundated. The safety side of this pandemic really necessitated authorities all over the world to issue all sorts of notices. And Malta was, of course, no exception. So we had a series of port notices, starting with the first one on the 3rd of February 2020, which spoke about, in view of the fact that the novel coronavirus had been declared a public health emergency, of international concern, there were loads of temporary recommendations given, with strict adherence to sanitary measures being necessary, indicating that the ship officer or master is to indicate to the port health medic whether there were any people on board who came from China. Then we were limiting that issue to China within the last 14 days, and whether it was the intention of such persons to disembark or embark such persons. Now, that was the very first port notice. But of course, as time went by, we had more and more port notices, and these port notices then started to really issue protocols, firstly on how persons who would interact with ships could indeed interact, what kind of personal protection equipment they had to wear, protocols on how conveyancing could take place, protocols on how bunker barges could actually approach these vessels and deliver the services, mandatory quarantine for these people once they disembarked, which of course led to huge problems, not only for the ships, not only for the crew, but also for persons who were interacting with these vessels and these crew members, on a number of occasions leading to the impossibility for such services to be rendered. Why? Because on a number of occasions, persons would go out to these ships, quite apart from requiring various permissions and what have you, would actually have to quarantine for 15 days once they actually got back. This gives you an idea of Valletta, our capital city, with two rather large harbors which are used continuously under normal circumstances. But of course, and that is a view of our Malta Freeport. And because eventually there were port notices which actually closed off our harbors, we really did see an absolute standstill of these areas, which are normally a hive of activity. The same can be said for the substantial ship repair industry we have in Malta. The same can be said for the tug operations, which are hugely busy, normally escorting ships coming in and out of harbor. And of course, serious effects on pilots boarding such ships. So the coronavirus and the pandemic, seen from this perspective, brings an appreciation of the real effect, the day-to-day effect on the ground, which this pandemic and all the safety security measures had on persons who are associated with this industry. There we have a view of a typical marina view in Malta of vessels flying the Malta flag. Again, during the pandemic, yachts could not come, so that affected the tourism industry. It affected the amount of service providers who normally service these people. And there we have a typical scene of a bunker barge, which, as I told you, was also very heavily affected. One port notice after the other, which produced more and more restrictions. Malta, which is normally used as a very popular port for crew changes, again, because of our position bang in the middle of the Mediterranean, right on the rum line between Suez and Gibraltar, whereas we would normally handle thousands of crew changes, that became hugely difficult and at one time absolutely impossible, because crew could not leave the vessels to come into Malta to leave through our airports. It was in July, 2nd of July, eventually of 2020, that there was a repeal of the previous port notices. Again, Malta was looking at what other countries were doing, and consequently, this is where international cooperation and moving in the same direction, positive direction, became very, very important. The effect on the maritime industry was substantial. As a maritime hub, from having 347 passenger ships carrying 849,000 passengers in 2019, we went down to 24 ships and 55,000 passengers in 2020. So you can imagine the impact that that had. Again, with Malta being a real important container transshipment hub, bang in the middle of the Med, again, because of our location, from 2,000 container ships per annum went down to a trickle in the first half of 2010-20, but then that recuperated during the latter part of 2020. Now, I'm just going to very quickly, very conscious of the time, going to go through some very real live cases which we had, which were affected by the COVID pandemic. And this really relates to the fact how so many ship owners and ship operators were financially affected very, very negatively, leading to even in some cases, to their bankruptcy. In one case, Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines Limited, which of course you have all heard of, one of the largest cruise line operators in the world, owner of numerous vessels registered in Malta, had actually bareboat chartered a number of its vessels to a company called Pullmantur. 4 of these vessels were the MV Sovereign and the Horizon. 2 of those were the Sovereign and the Horizon, and that is a picture of the Horizon. Now, what happened was that Royal Caribbean was actually the beneficial owner of the owning companies of these vessels, which, as I said, were chartered to these companies. These companies, in turn, actually entered into another agreement with Pullmantur Cruises Ship Management Limited. And it was this company that had entered into a charter party with a travel agency in France called Viagens Abreu, way in advance of any pandemic, for the charter of the Sovereign. And they had paid charter hire amounting to $1.2 million in advance. Well, no surprises as to what happens next. Due to the complete collapse of the cruise line industry, the charter could not be performed. Viagens Abreu wanted their money back, but Pullmantur were unable to pay. In the meantime, all the Pullmantur subsidiaries were not paying their charter to Royal Caribbean. Royal Caribbean was owed in excess of $27.2 million, and so Royal Caribbean pulled out of the charters. So at one moment in time, Royal Caribbean pulls out of the charters, Royal Caribbean wants to cut its own losses, and Royal Caribbean entered into a sales program of all its ships and sold of some of its ships rather, and sold some of these ships for scrap to the Turkish market. And there we have, of course, pictures, which we are now have become familiar with, of all these vessels and others in the Turkish scrapyards. But what happened to the Sovereign was that after it was sold by Royal Caribbean, as it was passing via Malta en route to Turkey, she stopped by Malta to pick up bunkers, and this was bang in the middle of COVID, and Viagens Abreu decided to arrest this vessel. And I'm mentioning this to you in order to show you all the various serious repercussions that actually ensued as a result of this pandemic. But of course, these Viagens Abreu had no right really to arrest the vessel, because the persons who are liable for those contracts was the other company, Pullmantur Cruises, that had gone bankrupt. And eventually the court in Malta, after we had to file an application for the release, and after we had to put up counter security of 1.2 million, because the most important thing for Royal Caribbean was for the ship to get to the breakers. So we put up security and argued over the money later. After we filed an application to have the vessel, the application of arrest removed and put up counter security, the court agreed that Viagens Abreu were not entitled to actually arrest that vessel. Moving on, there was then further cases of sales. I'm going to, yes?
Let me interrupt. Because from the floor, we have a number of people are waiting to engage. So would you like to cut shorter the presentation so that we can discuss with the floor? Okay.
I will do that right away. I will conclude. We saw, as a result of the pandemic, a number of owners who had, of course, were unable to pay their mortgage payments, and consequently the ships were arrested in Malta and sold in Malta. And to conclude, I would simply like to latch on to the human dimension, which was mentioned by so many other speakers, where we in Malta also had challenges associated with the with giving life-saving, with giving services through our armed forces and search and rescue operations. And this, in the area of the safety of life at sea, the Mediterranean is, of course, is an area where so many people unfortunately resort to crossing to get a better life in Europe. And as a result of the pandemic, our armed forces and search and rescue persons and personnel had, of course, very serious challenges with giving the necessary assistance to these people. And at one time, the government of Malta even had to charter vessels because of the port closures. These persons could not be brought in Malta, and consequently they were placed on board chartered vessels, which of course raised very serious human rights issues, and eventually they were brought to Malta after a couple of months and landed in Malta. But this is just an idea of the challenges that we faced from a day-to-day, hands-on, on-the-ground perspective. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fenech. Obviously, I will request perhaps Professor Wu Shichen next time arrange a longer time for you to present. Obviously, I learned tremendously from your presentation. All those cases happened just right at the point of our discussion, especially human perspective in time of COVID-19. So thank you very much for such a detailed elaboration. I apologize to Commodore, the next speaker, Commodore Ali Abbas, Director, National Institute of Maritime Affairs from Pakistan. Commodore Abbas, welcome and take the floor, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for introduction. I'm speaking from Karachi and I'm Director of National Institute of Maritime Affairs. I'm indeed grateful to South China Sea, China South Asia Research Center on the South China Sea for inviting me on the Symposium on Global Maritime Cooperation and Ocean Governance 2021. And particularly on international cooperation on maritime security and safety under COVID-19, this session. I'm aware of the paucity of time, and already a lot has been said. Actually, it is very difficult to be the last speaker because all the points have been amply covered. So hence, I will rather try to be brief and short. I'll start with my comments on the fact that we understand that our globe, which is known as a blue planet, about more than two-thirds of our area is sea. So the future lies on the economic resources and dependence on sea. This is very much has been appreciated through various talks. While we say that the sea and the oceans are the common heritage for mankind, so this has implications that there should be freedom of navigation, there should be safety and security guaranteed, and there should be free flow of trade. And so that all the countries and regions, they can exploit and capitalize on the resources provided by the oceans. So this implies that there has to be an international cooperation. There has to be proper legal governance. And there has to be capacity building, especially for the developing nations and those with less capacity. So these are the areas which warrant international cooperation. Now we see that all countries, as I said, that all countries, whether they're coastal or landlocked, they rely on the security of world's ocean and freedom of navigation, which is confirmed under the UN conventions on the law of the sea. Some of the areas which hamper the security of the oceans are, as has been discussed, piracy and armed robbery, maritime terrorism, drug trafficking and trafficking of hazardous material, toxic materials, human trafficking, smuggling, migrants, illegal activities on fisheries sector, waste trafficking, international and unlawful damage to the marine environment. All these areas present challenges to global efforts to maintain international peace and security and keep the world oceans accessible and safe for seafarers. Likewise, climate change and marine pollution are also adversely affecting billions of people. We understand that under the COVID environment, whenever there is a hardship and people are pressed to the limit that invites people become more vulnerable to crimes and exploitation. COVID recently, COVID has put a lot of limitations on borders for seafarers, as has been amply highlighted, air travel and sea entry points. So a lot of limitations were posed on port operations, shipping, various limitations on shippings, and difficulties for seafarers. Likewise, the security operations have also been hampered. For inculcating for these, as we understand that all these challenges and the problems I have highlighted, they are transnational in nature. They are not limited to any country or any region. So hence, a lot of international cooperation has to be generated. I'm pleased to inform, highlighted that I've been part of counter-piracy operations in the Red Sea, Horn of Africa, Indian Ocean, East African coast, and part of coalition maritime forces. We know that a lot of countries have generated security operations, especially in the Indian Ocean, to fight counter-piracy, which had surged in the early 2000, starting from 2004, and it continued to surge until 2012 and 13. So there have been a lot of efforts by NATO countries and by European Union and US-led coalition forces, which is known as CMF. So under the CMF, there is a counter-piracy operations which I've been part was that was CTF Combined Task Force 151, and we carried out these operations. So comparing those two, if we compare it to nowadays under COVID challenges, so because of the limitations and difficulties of COVID, not only the shipping sector has suffered and the seafarers have suffered, but also the security operations have also suffered. So my country, Pakistan, which has been part of coalition forces for fighting counter-piracy and international terrorism, certainly attaches a very high-level attention, comprehensive approach by participating in these, and additional realizing that it's an international effort and a coordinated and cooperative effort, and we need to provide synergy. So we every 2 years, every alternate years, Pakistan assembles and holds an international maritime exercise with the name of Aman. Aman means peace, where all the world navies and countries and observers are invited, and its slogan or its objective is together for peace.
Commodore Abbas, are you still? We are sorry that perhaps Commodore Abbas cannot really go through the line. I think the signal probably is not strong enough. Okay, probably we will wait for him to come back later. If he can manage through. The meantime, let's invite Professor Zhang Lirong, who is now sitting on the podium, and perhaps he can also share his comments on the papers before we open up the floor. So Professor Zhang, would you like to take the mic and make your comments, please?
Thank you very much. Thank you, the moderator. Thank you to all the presentations of the panelists. Please allow me to speak in Chinese. That will be quicker. 我不是这个海洋问题的专家，如果让我讲，我想这个从更大的一些时空来讲一讲涉及到海洋安全，以及安全合作，包括这个疫情方面的这个几点想法吧。我想第一个就是这个，现在关于一说到海洋安全，首先是想到中国南海，想到中国是不是在这个它成长的海军对世界和平带来威胁。我想可能首先要解决这么一个问题，就是中国是不是有权利成为一个海洋大国。从这个大航海时代以来，我觉着一些西方国家就形成了这么一个惯性思维，就觉着海洋是属于西方的，因为确实他们在从那个时代以来呢，在海上形成了比较这个强的这个海军吧。但是从航海本身来讲，应该说中国也有非常长的这个历史传统，这就不说了。所以就是从现在来讲，这个维护世界和平是不是就靠西方的这些武装力量或者海军就能做到？其他国家有没有这个权利？我觉得这是一个很大的问题。这个问题如果不解决，或者是你永远抱着一种零和这种思维去，中国的海军强大了，西方就会对西方造成颠覆性的这个影响。我说那问题就比较困难。如果这个问题解决了，可能下一个问题就是中国如果成为海洋大国，中国的海军成为一支这个力量很强的海军，那么对世界和平到底会不会造成威胁？我想历史上已经有了啊，郑和下西洋什么，这就不说了。从现在来讲，除了中国口头上多次表示不称霸，不欺负别国，从我们的一些实践，现在的实践来讲，也能说明，比如说中国是联合国5常里面派出最多的维和部队的，中国也积极参与了这个亚丁湾护航，应该说这些对世界和平都是带来积极影响的。中国没有这个在任何其他国家开战，所以这一点我觉得是应该这个能有一个方向性的。第3个问题，我觉得就是这个解决海洋安全，除了军事方面之外，我觉得更大的还是一个要促进发展，加强合作。我觉得这个时代的主题没有变，就是维护和平、促进发展、加强合作。刚才这个斯里兰卡外密这个也谈到了，其他的一些发言人也谈到了，我特别赞同，就是现在在这方面我们还有很多事情可以做，比如说港口建设，就是海上的这种基础设施建设，包括海洋经济的合作，都可以去做。另外，这个昨天这个也都很多专家都提到了啊，像这个捕鱼合作啊、海洋调查、人员培训等等，我都赞同。 我还想提一点，就是说现在谈的比较多的这个气候变化问题，在应对气候变化方面，我觉着海洋沿岸国可以做的很多，比如说这个海上的风力发电，包括光伏发电，甚至核电站的建设，潮汐技术的利用，我觉得这些大家都可以合作，特别是发达国家跟发展中国家完全可以合作。发达国家有比较先进的技术，发展中国家，特别是这个亚洲国家，包括东南亚国家，都有比较强的这个制造能力，在这方面合作的空间是很大的。再一个，刚才就提到这个疫情合作，确实疫情对这个海上运输、人员往来带来了很大的这个影响。在这方面，我觉得各国当下也是一个合作的重点的方向。至于这个海上安全怎么管理、怎么加强，我觉得一点就是还要根据国际法，按照国际法来办事，以联合国宪章和原则为基础的国际关系准则来处理。再一个就是中国也反复提出要当事国的双边或者多边的这种磋商、友好协商来解决，这应该说是解决问题的比较这个有效的这么一个路径。好，我就先说这么一点。
Thank you, Professor Zhang, for your enlightening comments. Since Commodore Abbas has just returned, I wonder, Commodore Abbas, you'd like to continue your presentation to finishing up so that we can pick up your point. Please.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for giving me time again. I will quickly try to conclude my talk. And my apologies that I went offline because of some internet problem. So what I was saying that despite good number of efforts that have been generated by various countries and organizations at various levels, yet the challenges of maritime security continue to grow, and our response must keep pace with it. The challenges will keep growing, whether they are challenges or threats to international shipping or safety of navigation or climate issues or biodiversity or other areas of safety and security. We must collaborate. Collaboration, international cooperation and collaboration for creating synergy in the effort and capacity building, because for any individual nation, it will be very difficult to generate that kind of resources which are required to fight these challenges. So with this in mind, I very much welcome and the holistic and comprehensive approach of today's talks. I was really pleased to listen to these talks, and that everyone and people from every region, they are aware of this issue and they are willing to cooperate. And everyone have given certain points which are beneficial for international cooperation. I will encourage the participants to build on this momentum and translate into actions at their respective areas of influence and in their respective region. The most important areas to look into are, which we must look, that first of all, as I said in the beginning, implementation of international legal framework, and then building capabilities, then expanding partnerships, and promoting holistic crime prevention responses. And also allow me to elaborate some of these points. I think they really do not need elaboration, as we are trying to wind up this, and I'm trying to conclude this my talk. So I would just once again emphasize that we must harness advanced technologies and data which is going to be a key opportunity and priority for our mandated areas, and we must help our partners and all those who collaborate. Some of the regions or some of the countries, they also have been generating a lot of individual efforts regarding maritime security operations. It is very much appreciated, but the key, based on my comment or my experience, is synergy and cooperation and comprehensiveness. The private sector should also partner in these endeavors. Major shipping companies which face basically a lot of suppression because of piracy, and which need free flow, and they so that their voyages are not interrupted, and pirates and criminals and terrorists, they cannot exploit themselves. We apart from that, we also look into the root causes of these people who are involved in illegal trade, illegal smuggling, because they want to generate illegal money, and the root causes lie on the land. So we must go and wherever possible, all those people, all those agencies, all those international agencies, and all the countries, they must look into the root causes which lie on the land. So towards the end, I will once again like to conclude my talk that we know that lands divide and seas unite. So sea is the common heritage which unites all the nations, and it is incumbent upon all of us for our shared future and for our future generations that we must collaborate and cooperate, not to fight, not to only develop the blue economy and maritime economies and other areas, but also keep fighting and keep enhancing the capacity to fight against these challenges. In the end, I would once again thank you to the Institute for giving me time, and also my apologies for a brief interruption in my talk, and also thank you very much for giving me another piece of time. Thank you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm glad that you can return after a technical challenge, but I think we have all had daunting tasks. We need to complete this session in about 12 minutes, because the closing session will come exactly 3:30 here. So I would encourage all of you, if you are in the scene, please raise your hand. Otherwise, please write your question, short question, to the chat box, so that I can pick up from here and I can read through to our presenters, whether you would have some direct question to them. So the floor is open.
Fuguo, may I have questions?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Liu Fuguo. And also, I really enjoyed the presentations and commentaries provided by speakers and commentators. Particularly Dr. Anne Fenich. It's very good to see you online. My question goes to both Jenny and Martin, my two older friends. To Jay, you just mentioned in your presentation, both Malaysia and Vietnam conducted law enforcement activities in the nearby water of 9-dash line. I'm curious, what were they doing? Crack down on IUU fishing, or protect oil and gas exploitation, or protect the fishing activities? To Martin, my question is, what is the current situation of IUU fishing activities in the South China Sea region? And are there any confrontation between Malaysia and Vietnam in the South China Sea region? If the answer is yes, in which area? And also you just mentioned in your presentation, United States provides help to Malaysia to conduct maritime law enforcement activities. What is the kind of such a help? Thank you.
So perhaps since we are in such a short period of time for floor discussion, I wonder in the scene whether there are some questions so that we can collect all together and we can distribute to our presenters in time. Anything, at least from the chat box, no any direct questions found here. Okay, if for now, no immediate question, can I invite?
Yeah, Dr. Yan Yan has a question, right?
Okay, please, Dr. Yan Yan, please go ahead.
Thank you. Well, my questions goes to Captain Jay and also Captain Sebastian, Commander Jay and Sebastian. Well, regarding the Philippines and the United States Coast Guard cooperation, my question to Commander Jay that we see the news that the two countries Coast Guard conducted several joint exercises in the South China Sea, especially around the waters near Scarborough Shore. So I'm wondering that next year, will you enhance your Coast Guard's cooperation with the United States, and will you consider signing a ship riders agreement between Philippines and the United States? And the second question goes to Captain Sebastian, because we saw that quite regularly, Malaysia and Vietnam has a fishing conflict, especially between Malaysia law enforcement agencies and illegal Vietnam fishing boats. And last year, we also see the conflict involved the use of force and also when Vietnamese fishermen die. So I'm wondering whether the two countries have talked about this, and do you have any measures to manage this kind of conflict in the South China Sea? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me now invite perhaps Dr. J. Tariela to respond question, 2 to 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Professor Wu, for your interesting question. Just a very brief answer to your question as to what is the main content of the agreement between Malaysian Maritime Enforcement Agency and Vietnam Coast Guard. It's just like a confirmatory question asking me whether it's related to maritime law enforcement and to address IUUF. So just to give a very short background, the MMEA and Vietnam Coast Guard's agreement was actually a result of what had happened between the Malaysian Maritime Enforcement Agency and the Vietnamese fishermen, wherein there is an incident that a Vietnamese fisherman died because of a particular law enforcement activity of MMEA. So the main objective of this agreement is to strengthen cooperation in addressing illegal fishing, not just against the Vietnamese, but even among other nationalities who are violating IUUF-related international regulations in fishing. Now, for the other question as to the United States and the Philippines, let me first highlight the fact that the U.S. Coast Guard and the Philippine Coast Guard cooperation is not just purely focused on maritime security. There are other avenues of cooperation wherein the Philippine Coast Guard is also strengthening its ties with the United States, not just in maritime law enforcement, not just in South China Sea, but it also includes maritime safety, maritime domain awareness. So to the question whether we're going to intensify the cooperation between the Philippines and the United States, I think so. There are a lot of avenues for cooperation that we are still planning to develop in the next years to come. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, Captain Martin Sebastian, please.
Thank you, Professor Wu, my old friend. And also a question from the floor. These two questions are identical. And I think our Malaysian friend, Commander J, has answered the Malaysian question as well. So I just have to add on some more inputs into that. The Memorandum of Understanding between Vietnamese Coast Guard and Malaysian Coast Guard is underway. It should be signed anytime now. There's going to be some high-level visits to Malaysia, and they're going to talk about this issue of illegal fishing, not oil and gas, illegal fishing, because we not only look at illegal fishing, we're also looking at other crimes like ship-to-ship transfer, transshipment, and this kind of stuff. And that will require something like what we did in Straits of Malacca to identify the logistics chain of the organized crime, of how this forced labor is being done in South China Sea, how the ship-to-ship transfer, the fueling is being supplied to illegal fishing and all that. So only through cooperative arrangement like this, we can actually come together. So a replica of that is already in the Straits of Malacca. The replica of that is already in Sulawesi. So I think it's about time some sort of arrangements are done in the South China Sea, which has been absent from cooperative arrangements for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you. Since we don't have much time left, can I invite Professor Zhang Renping to respond in 1 minute? I know this is almost impossible with such a comprehensive and fruitful comments from all the leading experts here. So I hope Professor Zhang will just select some key points to respond. Professor Zhang, please. Hello, Professor Zhang.
Thank you,
Are you
Mr.
there?
Chair. Yes, thank you, Mr.
Yes.
Chair. You are calling me. I don't know what the question is.
No, I just like you to generally respond to commentators' point earlier.
Oh yeah, thank you. 1 minute. I think the three commentators, they have made a very comprehensive comments to all the four speakers' presentations. And Professor Warwick Garlett, he made something in a very detailed and also comprehensive. While Dr. Anne Fennick, while her presentation reminded me 30 years ago my own story. I was signed off and repatriated in Malta 30 more years ago. Thank you. You reminded my all the seafaring history. Thank you. And also for the Ali Abbas, his comment also made the whole area, including the Indian Ocean, including the some other areas, more inclusive. So I would say they are really professional and very dedicated. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much with such an effective response. Let me now invite Mr. Helmut Hess to respond in general terms. Sorry, also 1 minute.
Sorry, Chairman. I hardly understand in a moment any questions or any comments here. So I'm not too sure what you expect me to do in a moment, what you expect me to answer to.
But never mind. I think you can perhaps, if you remember just now, Professor Warwick Garlett made the comment.
I cannot hear you. I'm sorry. I cannot understand your question.
Okay, right. Perhaps a simple question is, since on the presentation, you briefly touch upon now the discussion shifts to the United Nations Security Council, not really addressed to IMO. So perhaps you just need to address this point. Thank you.
Well, again, I have difficulties understanding, but I got the gist, I think, of the question now. Yes, I mean, as I said in my presentation, we actually from IMO at the time approached the United Nations and the United Nations Security Council to assist in piracy of armed robbery in the Somali Basin, bearing in mind that the perpetrators of the crimes, of course, are living, operating, planning, and returning to the shore. So we can do so much at sea, but the land activities are, of course, in more concern. Now, with regards to the shift to the UN, with the recent attacks in the Gulf of Oman, that is, of course, also a different, shall we say, activity. This is bordering more on war activities, or certainly terrorist activities, which again needs involvement of the United Nations and the United Nations Security Council. So perhaps in the long term, we'll have to distinguish very much and very distinctly between what kind of crimes are even perpetrated at sea there, and who would be, in the end, the responsible body to deal with this. If it's more bordering to war crimes, obviously much more the United Nations. There needs to be a very close cooperation between the specialized agency of the United Nations dealing with maritime and the United Nations itself. Member states are, of course, all the same, but the involved entities from those member states are different. It's close cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this question definitely needs further elaboration, if not for research, but I think at least we can find a way to discuss further what exactly the shift means to all the shipping efforts here. Let me conclude by addressing to a couple of points here. I note this afternoon, all the presentation have addressed to wider aspect of those issues in this critical time of COVID-19. And I think I'm sorry that we cannot really open up for individual topic for further discussion from the floor and also our audience today. But obviously there are some key words, at least if you remember what we heard from our presenters and commentators. Number one is shipping difficulty and crisis. Second one is seafarers crisis. This is an unprecedented human challenge in the sea, and also connecting with humanitarian challenge and also human security, and now ending up in individual national security challenge, not including those law enforcement, but all the operation with this commercial trade. Obviously, this issue already reflected such a challenge, not just for a region and global market, but also individual states. I thank you on behalf of the organizers, to our presenters this afternoon, making such a wonderful presentation, and we learned tremendously. I do believe our audience also learned tremendously. Probably we also pave the way for the next round of discussion sometime next year. My final point to extend to Professor Wu Shichen for his continuously putting the effort to studies and also to work on this important field. So obviously we need to thank him and to bring up such a maritime global governance issue to all of us, not just addressing to the region, but also global context. So with this, I want to thank all the participants and also presenters for contributing fruitful knowledge to all of us. Once again, thank you so much for your contribution.
Very much.
Okay, thank you, Foucault.
Thank you, Dr. Wu.
Thank you, Professor Liu.
Thank you.
感谢主持人、各位发言嘉宾和
Thank
评
you very
论嘉
much.
宾。
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you， 感谢在现场的主持人吴世存主席和特邀评论嘉宾张丽蓉老师。请二位在观众席就坐。闭幕式将于5分钟后开始，请大家稍作休息。结果是我们拖了。
Really wonderful
National Institute for South China Sea
enjoy.
Studies is a leading think tank on the South China Sea issues, plays a key role in providing policymakers with expertise, coordinating joint academic projects, and bridging dialogues among various parties and across different tracks. Established in 1996, the Institute was originally named the Hainan Research Institute for the South China Sea. It has since grown in tandem with the rising importance attached to South China Sea issues. In July 2004, the Institute gained national recognition and was renamed as National Institute for South China Sea Studies. In order to promote South China Sea Studies and improve the Institute's academic work, a Beijing office was established in January 2013. The Institute is composed of 7 research programs, including the Research Center for Oceans Law and Policy, the Research Center for Maritime Economy, the Research Center for...
The first symposium on maritime cooperation and ocean governance was held in Haikou, the capital city of Hainan Province. Symposium organizer Dr. Wu Shichuan, president of National Institute for South China Sea Studies and chairman of the board of China Southeast Asia Research Center of the South China Sea, called to move against the trend of deglobalization, establish an international academic platform dedicated to the plethora of marine issues, and to pour wisdom towards a shared and sustainable future. Former President of the Philippines, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, Secretary General of the International Seabed Authority, Michael Lodge, and Teresa Chan Yonghua, founding member of the Asian Institute of International Law, were among hundreds of experts from around the globe calling for a multilateral approach to improving ocean governance and enhanced cooperation at the November 5th to 6th, 2020 Symposium on Maritime Cooperation and Ocean Governance. In her keynote speech, Madam Arroyo stressed the necessity to adopt a multifaceted perspective and multidimensional approach in dealing with China-Philippine relations. She held the view that joint development does not undermine the legal right to the claims of related disputants of the South China Sea. Teresa Zhang argued that the intervention of external factors only aggravates the original tension, asserting that the Western approach of relying on confrontation and international law stood in stark contrast to the Asian approach based on mutual understanding. While many parts of the world are still mired in the COVID-19 emergency, Fu Ying, chairwoman of the Center for International Strategy and Security at Tsinghua University, reminded attendees of the urgency to enhance global governance and improve the efficiency of international coordination mechanisms, which is also the case for ocean governance, emphasizing that multilateralism is the only approach. Fu, who is also China's former Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, encouraged harmonious coexistence between ocean and human beings to achieve peace and stability across regional countries.
I think that the dialogue is essential. It's particularly difficult now with COVID-19. We need to keep the momentum up. I think that there is ground for further symposia. This is a first step. I think that it is worth having another step, or 2 or 3, and this might, who knows, yield to some modest forward movement.
The first symposium on maritime cooperation and ocean governance was held in Haikou, the capital city of Hainan Province. Symposium organizer Dr. Wu Shichuan, president of National Institute for South China Sea Studies and chairman of the board of China Southeast Asia Research Center of the South China Sea, called to move against the trend of deglobalization, establish an international academic platform dedicated to the plethora of marine issues, and to pour wisdom towards a shared and sustainable future. Former President of the Philippines, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, Secretary General of the International Seabed Authority, Michael Lodge, and Teresa Chan Yonghua, founding member of the Asian Institute of International Law, were among hundreds of experts from around the globe calling for a multilateral approach to improving ocean governance and enhanced cooperation at the November 5th to 6th, 2020 Symposium on Maritime Cooperation and Ocean Governance. In her keynote speech, Madame Arroyo stressed the necessity to adopt a multifaceted perspective and multidimensional approach in dealing with China-Philippine relations. She held the view that joint development does not undermine the legal right to the claims of related disputants at the South China Sea. Teresa Zhang argued that the intervention of external factors only aggravates the original tension, asserting that the Western approach of relying on confrontation and international law stood in stark contrast to the Asian approach based on mutual understanding. While many parts of the world are still mired in the COVID-19 emergency,
尊敬的各位来宾，本次会议即将开始，请您尽快就座，并将手机等通讯设备关闭或置于静音状态。谢谢您的合作。
Ladies and gentlemen, the event will begin shortly. Can we please ask for you to kindly take your seats? We would like to remind you again to switch off all mobile phones and put electronic devices to silent mode. Thank you for your cooperation.
Peace and stability across regional countries.
I think that dialogue is essential. It's particularly difficult now with COVID-19. We need to keep the momentum up. I think that there is ground for
女士们、先生们，大家下午好！感谢各位出席2021年海洋合作与治理论坛。经过2天的观点分享和交流，我们的会议进入尾声。本次论坛的闭幕式现在开始。首先，有请中美研究中心执行主任研究员洪农发表闭幕演讲。有请洪农博士。洪农博士 ，Dr. Hong, are you online?
Thank you, everyone. It's been a great pleasure to have met so many friends and colleagues online, virtually through these 2 days discussion. And thanks for the organizing committee, particularly the supporting team of the National Institute for South China Sea Studies, for their tremendous efforts putting this program together and make this event happen. It allows us a great opportunity to share a lot of views without traveling, although I personally prefer the traveling in person, hopefully in the near future. I learned a lot, and then on the one hand, I think allows a candid exchange of difference. On the other hand, it provides a platform for all of us to share our research on a variety of issues on ocean governance. So in the next few minutes, allow me to say a few words about the ongoing efforts of ICAS as a co-sponsor in terms of its efforts on capacity building on ocean governance. Allow me to share my screen. So here, we launched this Maritime Affairs Pro. It is one of our efforts on ocean governance capacity building. It is, we launched this Maritime Affairs program in September, which is composed of, the purpose is to gather and also debate both the historical and also the newly developed maritime related issues, including US-China international maritime affairs. And under this program, we have 4 feature projects. One is the MAP issue checker, which I'm going to explain later. And then we have this public MAP publication, including very short commentary to journal article and to also to land books. And then we have events, including this one, and also including our ongoing China, Canada, Asian Pacific and Arctic Maritime Security Symposium, which has been lasted for 9 rounds. And then we also have this MAP media. The project includes short form periodical Twitter campaign and also related audio visual products. As I mentioned, we have this MAP issue tracker. Right now we have 3, the polar tracker and also East China Sea tracker and the South China Sea tracker. So the idea is to provide an online and also collaborative platform, which is designed to encourage intellectual exchange on maritime development and issues around the world. So I would like to particularly introduce our Antarctica tracker, which is one of the polar tracker. So we launched this Antarctica tracker yesterday in order to echo and celebrate this symposium on global maritime cooperation and global ocean governance. It is one of the leading tracker that ICA has been devoted to. I'd like to quickly show what it looked like. So this, when you look at this page, you're going to see on the left side, we have this Antarctica maritime claims, and on the right hand, we have the Antarctica research station. So we don't want to highlight the sovereignty or sovereign right disputes in the Antarctica region. The idea why we developed these Arctic maritime claims in order to show you why all these countries, they are located their research station, because we have to follow many of the claims. So if you go into this slide, you're going to see all these claimant states, individual countries profile. And then, for instance, let me take the Argentina country as one example. When going to this site, you will see the major maritime disputes. You're going to see where's their baseline and where there's territorial sea claims, where the EEZ claim. And the following, you are going to see a very simple storytelling of what is going on in terms of a dispute between Argentina and other countries. This is one of the examples. And then let me quickly go into the Antarctica Research Station. When you click on this one, and that will take you to, for instance, this interaction of all these countries and research station. When you click on any of these, one of these research stations, you will find more detailed information on where's the location, what's the capacity, and to which country it is under which country's operations. So I think that's one of the examples that I want to share with you. That is what we have been doing on terms of the ICAS in terms of the ongoing efforts on capacity building or ocean governance. So the issue tracker are a part of our commitment to ensuring that the public, researchers and policymakers have easy access to the latest updates regarding the polar region of the world. And the next phrase, the second phrase of Antarctica tracker, will be showing how their Commission for the Conservation of Antarctica Marine Living Resources, and also the Convention on Conservation of Antarctica Marine Living Resources, influence the development of maritime protected areas in this region, and also providing a general oversight of the region, as well as how the US and China look at these issues involving within these two regimes. So ICAS look forward to working closely with our partners and also all of you to further explore our role as a think tank to improve capacity development in ocean governance. I also looking forward to meeting you soon in the future, hopefully. Thank you. Yeah.
谢谢洪龙博士。接下来有请加拿大埃尔伯塔大学中国学院名誉院长侯炳东发表闭幕演讲。
Thank you very much, Nung, and I salute the work that the ICAS is doing in terms of mapping and providing facts. I also salute the title of this symposium, in effect, Global Maritime Governance. The maritime world, 2/3 of the Earth's surface, does not consist of sealed regional elements. Oceans have connectivity. Maritime commerce and navies take advantage of this connectivity. Similarly, maritime law is global law. It's not the law of one ocean or one sea. However, much of the body of international law, including maritime law, was developed in the West. But with 2/3 of the world's population and a rising percentage of the world's economic activity and maritime commerce, it's only natural that Asian legal scholarship and views of Asian governments should provide their own contributions to the international maritime law and maritime governance to the benefit of all nations. Maritime governance is also not isolated from the great debates of the management of this planet. During the last 2 days, the existential issue of climate change has intruded repeatedly into our discussions, as well as maritime environmental issues and maritime biodiversity challenges. While these issues complicate our discussions and require specialist expertise, they do remind us that it is in the realm of the world's oceans the cooperation is most needed, where the interests of individual states can collide, be it in terms of security, fishing rights, or resource extraction. Progress in maritime governments can flourish only when multilateralism is allowed to flourish, and where collaborative approaches to maritime challenges can find broad support. Finally, I'd like to thank the National Institute for South China Sea Studies and all of those whose hard work made this symposium a success. Thank you for your efforts, and thank you for allowing me to be part of this symposium. Thank you.
谢谢侯秉东院长。接下来，让我们以热烈的掌声欢迎中国南海研究院院长王胜致闭幕词。
Distinguished guests, dear colleagues and friends, good afternoon. In the past 2 days, academics from China and other countries have exchanged views and held discussions on topics such as opportunities and challenges to global ocean governance, reframe a security architecture to the South China Sea, ocean governance practice in the South China Sea, frontier research on international law of the sea, ocean governance practices in the Arctic, international cooperation on maritime security and safety under the influence of COVID-19, and blue economy and sustainable ocean development. Under such topic, we have seen the sparks of wisdom in discussion. The symposium is a complete success with fruitful outcomes. On behalf of the hosts, I would like to thank our partners of this event, the United Nations, the International Seabed Authority, Commission of the Limits of the Continental Shelf, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and China Oceanic Development Foundation, the Center for International Security and Strategy of Tsinghua University, the Institute for China-American Studies, the Institute for China-European Studies, the Institute of Boundary and Ocean Studies of Wuhan University, China Institute of University of Alberta, Yazhou Bay Science and Technology Administration, and Hainan Tropical Ocean University. I would also like to thank scholars and academics who have been working with us for years. I'd like to thank Hainan Provincial Government and the Sanyang Municipal Government for the great support to this symposium. In the past 2 days, we have explored concepts, ideas, and pathways of regional and global ocean governance from a theoretical perspective, and exchanged views on the security order and functional cooperation in the South China Sea from an empirical perspective. We have conducted theoretical analysis on frontier areas in ocean governance, such as conservation or biological diversity in polar regions, under deep sea and beyond natural jurisdiction. We have also held a discussion on practical issues such as building of regional security and order, as well as blue partnership and ocean economy. It can be said that whether you are engaged in academic research or policy research, whether you are engaged in legal, political, or economic, or social research, you have been enlightened in this particular symposium. Many speakers, commentators, based on international practice and the successful experience of different countries and regions in global ocean governance, looked into existing problems in the key areas of global ocean governance and put forward invaluable recommendations for reference. They outlined global ocean governance from a bird's eye view and presented its diverse concepts and cultures, which are shared and valuable assets of the international community on ocean governance issues. Among the Chinese and foreign guests participating in this symposium in person or online, some are friends for many years. I've seen some very old faces here, and other are new friends. Based on the platform for international academic exchanges, we have conducted in-depth and fruitful discussions to maintain academic contacts and friendship with COVID-19 is still ranging around the world. It is in this context that we strive to overcome the difficulties, make this symposium an academic brand name, and contribute to global ocean governance and international cooperation. I hope to make the symposium even better in the future, and I hope the pandemic will be over soon so that all of us can meet in person in the best season in Sanya, Hainan, for deeper discussions. Dear friends, let us see each other next year. Thank you.
谢谢王院长。接下来有请泰国亚洲和平和解理事会理事、中国东南亚南海研究中心理事、泰国前副外长苏拉扎·格森素瓦发表闭幕致辞。
Good afternoon. First of all, please allow me to express my sincere appreciation for Dr. Wu Shichun, Chairman of the Board of China Southeast Asia Research Center on the South China Sea, or CSAC, and founding President of National Institute for South China Sea Studies, as well as all members of the staff of the Institute for their very hard work and efforts in organizing this important symposium. The variety of expertise from so many distinguished speakers from so many regions of the world has provided us an enriched and diversified depth of knowledge on global maritime cooperation and ocean governance, from the Arctic to the South China Sea, from UNCLOS to the UNFCCC, and particularly on marine environment and the South China Sea. Of course, I think any one single academic symposium could not provide final solutions to pending issues in question. But this GMCOG 2021 symposium has provided so many valuable arguments and rationale for this rich pool of speakers and participants, so much so that I believe these arguments could give rise to more attention by policy and decision makers in the future. I hope that several policy and decision makers would further examine these academic views and findings from this symposium's presentations to help nations reach acceptable solutions to various aspects of the pending South China Sea issues. Here at the same time with the COP26, the GMCOG has provided strong evidence that marine environmental issues and the need for urgent measures for sustainable marine environment in the South China Sea are of utmost concern. Functional cooperation between littoral states of the South China Sea has been repeatedly called for to ensure the sustainable ecology and the biodiversity of the South China Sea, which is so vital for the livelihood of the people of China and all ASEAN member states. The Asian Peace and Reconciliation Council, APRC, of which I am a council member, has advocated various forms of functional cooperation in the South China Sea since 2015. As we have heard, functional cooperation is a provisional measure already provided for both UNCLOS and DOC provisions in order to preserve peace, security, prosperity in South China Sea. I am more than certain that while pending the COC conclusion, if China and ASEAN member states could illustrate to the world that we really mean business when we talk about keeping the South China Sea, the sea of peace, security, and prosperity, through implementing a number of functional cooperation initiatives, then we can certainly mitigate the unnecessary interference from outside the region. I think we must illustrate that we are serious about the South China Sea being our vital shared destiny and livelihood. We, China and ASEAN, must illustrate that despite the question of sovereignty, we are genuinely serious in implementing functional regional cooperation in any fields possible, especially in the field of marine environment or even marine tourism. We must ensure the final conclusion of the COC soonest as a guarantee to keep governance in our South China Sea. Finally, I hope that today's symposium will be another important step toward Greater China ASEAN functional cooperation in the South China Sea for the benefits of the people in the region and the future lasting peace and security and prosperity in South Asia. I thank you, Dr. Wu Shichun, and all the member staff very much. Thank you very much indeed.
谢谢索拉加夫外长。最后，让我们以热烈的掌声，有请中国东南亚南海研究中心理事会主席、中国南海研究院创始院长吴世存致辞。
最后讲了，我简单一点啊，这个要收尾了。My closing remarks will be extremely brief. Actually, we are approaching to the end of the symposium on global maritime cooperation and ocean governance. During the last 2 days, we touched upon many important issues that we are interested. I don't think I needed to look at them one by one. To me, I got many takeaways from these important events. I do think our discussions were worthwhile, fruitful, and engaging. As a leading organizer of this event, I would like to be on behalf of the organizers of this conference to give my sincere thanks to all of you who are senior diplomats, scholars, representatives, for your active participation and valuable contributions to this symposium. And also my thanks go to my team who are here. They have been involving in preparation for this symposium for more than 3 months. They overcome many difficulties. So please accept my sincere appreciation. And also I would like to thank the company, Zihai Wangcao, event managing company, which provides us professional service to this event, and also the hotel. Now we are Grand Hyatt Sanya Haitan Wan, and also importantly, the translation team for their professional, beautiful, brilliant translation, which serves as a bridge, make our discussion easier, connect us to discuss every issue without language difficulties. And also finally, I hope next year, this time, we will be able to host the symposium in person. I guess it's absolutely possible. Ladies and gentlemen, may I now announce the symposium on global maritime cooperation and ocean governance is adjourned. Thank you.
感谢各位出席2021年海洋合作与治理论坛。I wish you a safe trip back. See you next year.